So let's take these into our prayer this morning. Grandfather and grandmother, ancestors and elders in sacred Mother Earth, we're grateful to come and to sit in your presence. Breathe in the energy and the ethers of the universe which connect us in a good way to our human family as well as our spirit family. I pray today that you would bring us a measure of enlightenment and help us to understand this red road upon which we walk and we have been called to walk. We come here to fellowship with one another and to learn from each other. And may that be the way that we enjoy and experience this time together this morning. I thank you for all who are here today. I hope. We've been spending the month of May talking about the first of the 7 sacred teachings, which is humility. We had a time a few weeks ago when we just had an open discussion about some things that you would like me to speak about or teach about, or things that you wanted to learn or have greater clarity. And it was Maria who suggested that we just kind of go back to the basics and go back to the beginning and let's spend some time looking at each one of the 7 sacred teachings and trying to see how, although that teaching is a very ancient teaching, it's also a very contemporaneous one because it has significance, relevance, and value to our life today, particularly when it comes to inspiration, when it comes to motivation, when it comes to a reason why. That's what we experience together as we come together in fellowship and we learn from each other and we teach from each other. But today is the last Sunday in the month, and this is the last Sunday, at least for a while, that we'll be talking about one of the specific, uh, although we'll begin next month, not next Sunday because we'll be somewhere else next Sunday. But we'll spend the Sundays in June talking about honesty. And then we'll move all through the 7 sacred teachings and see how all that fits together. All of this is like a puzzle. And it's not there by accident. I don't want to bring any attention to me because that's what humility is all about. It's just speaking truth from the heart and not have to worry about where one is sounding braggadocious or speaking out of an attitude of ego or pride, when we just tell the facts of what happened. It was in Hovenweep. We decided 12 years ago, I think, that all of this came to me in a vision. Of course, the medicine wheel has been around for generations, and so have the sacred teachings. Now, I cannot say that I am unique as regards discovering the synchronicity and how all of those things fit together. The 7 directions, the 7 sacred teachings, and how delicately they all coordinate together to bring us eventually to that place where Crazy Horse said, when you are there and that place within you, and I am there within that place with me, it is then that we shall be as one. And that's the central focus of the 7 sacred teachings. I had someone not really challenge me, not long ago, but at least ask a reasonable question. In that, and our conversation was about how through the native eyes we see everything pretty much occurring and happening within the container of circles of beginnings and endings and starting over again, almost like a vortex or a cycle, where traditionally we think of things linearly, which establishes a beginning and which presumes an end. And that space in between is what we call life. A little bit different the way native people see it. We see everything in and through the eyes and the persuasion of a circle. So I want to kind of go out on a limb here because someone may ask me afterwards, where did that come from? What's your authority on that? And here's a clever way of thinking about this where it reinforces our notion of everything happening and occurring within the dimensions of the circle. I think that we could actually go back to that in the beginning moment. However you understand that, however you've been taught to understand that, every religion has its own unique story of creation. Every tribe has its own unique story of creation, the majority of which follows the Genesis narrative of in the beginning it was dark and God wanted light, and there you go through 7 days, and here we are. But what if we think about the medicine wheel in a way that we can say it was introduced to the people as part of our original instructions of how we are to live our life, plan our affairs, and navigate our behavior in a relatively strange and foreign place that we came from the spirit realm and we showed up here on earth and began our journey. And what I want to suggest to you is if we ask the question, well, when did all of this begin? And how can we see and understand ourselves fitting into that cycle and that circle of the medicine way of life? I think it's fair to say, or to at least presume, that if we go back to anyone's creation story, that in the beginning, these 7 sacred teachings were introduced to the people. The concept of the medicine wheel was introduced to the people. The concept of the cycle and circle of life was introduced to the people, and we still follow it today. So there are many layers then of interpreting and understanding the novelties of the medicine wheel, all of which again fit together like a perfectly designed puzzle, not by accident and not by coincidence. And so if we think about that then this way, that we would say in the beginning, when all was created out of nothing, that began with, again, to suggest a biblical text, let there be light. Let there be light. I think was one of the first words that Creator spoke in the traditional creation story. He spoke light into the darkness. And that light is a product of the East. It's the place and the paradigm and the priority where everything fits together is in the beginning. It's where it all began. So this circle started spinning long before anyone was really ever even aware of it. And then soon as we began to practice a medicine way and an indigenous way of life only then did it come out in terms of a visual and wording that we can all somehow relate to. So that which began in the beginning is also relevant to you and to me. Because again, from a physical perspective, regardless of what your birthday is, we're born into a season of East. Regardless if your birthday is Christmas Day, but when new birth occurs, as regards the medicine wheel, that occurs in the East, out of darkness and into light, out of death into life, out of chaos and into something that is collectively generous, is how we receive it in our instructions of how we will live our life. There are 7 sacred teachings. I'd like also to suggest that if you think about the teachings as though they have been braided together, much like the sweetgrass that we use as a sacrament on our altar. If we think about, where we are in our progress in the medicine wheel, understanding that everything begins in the East, everything wakes up and comes back to life or is born again, or is born in the season of the East. But within these 7 strands, within each one, I want to suggest to you that there are 7 sub-strands that make up the 7 sacred teachings. Does that make any sense at all? But if we take each one of the sacred teachings and look at it as though it's woven together or braided together like a braid of sweetgrass, within that one braid, that one teaching, I'm going to suggest that there are maybe more, but I like to keep things consistent. So if there's 7 sacred strands of life and teaching, makes sense there ought to be 7 individual strands that make up the strand of humility. So here's what I have to offer. First of all, is everybody with me now as to getting a better understanding of the ebb and flow of the medicine wheel and the many layers that we can use all these teachings? I think I said it maybe even last week, that if you think about the medicine wheel as being a map, a guideline, a map, and then we can think of the 7 sacred teachings as the legend as to how to read that map. That makes sense? Every map that you have, you got all these roads zigzagging all across the place, and then you have down usually in the lower right-hand corner of the map a legend as to how to interpret all of the things that you see in the map. So a map without its directive of how to use it is pretty much a waste of time. And if we know how to use it and don't have the map, we're going to continue walking around being lost. So that is the importance of how those two, the teachings and the directions, all fit together in a very mysterious way, but also in a very intentional way. So I'd like to suggest, if we finalize our talk about humility and we take everything that we have learned over the last several Sundays, the final bit of piece of the puzzle that needs to find itself was spot on with what Mark was sharing with us just a few moments ago. We can come in a good way. We can come in a humble way. Again, remembering that the humble way is not necessarily the doormat way. We don't have to be servants or slaves to anyone or anything. It's just a matter of recognizing that there are things bigger than our own individual selves. It's not a matter of thinking ourselves in a negative way or, you know, a manner which one would respond. For example, what Mark did yesterday or last week. If you take that and put that into the context of an old Western movie where the cowboy has just rescued the woman who's tied to the railroad tracks, and she says, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." And he says, "Oh, shucks, man, 'twarn't nothing." But it is something. It's a big deal when we think about humility in action. And Mark's example that he shared with us early is a perfect example of humility in action. We can say all day long, "Oh, we get it, we understand this, and we understand that," but the real litmus test is how we live our life. How we live our life and the decisions that we make to practice these seven sacred teachings, which again will bring us to that place and that point of love. And what Mark shared with us earlier is a perfect example of how this works. Perfect example. A man going to Augusta for another reason thinks more about himself than of just about himself, and remembers a dear brother that we shared a couple of years of our life with down there in the hospital in Augusta. And Mark is mindful of these seven sacred teachings, and the first of which is humility. So in this situation, Mark thought more of himself, or more about other people than he did of himself, and thought about how I can bless them, how I can show them an expression of love, not just from him, because at that moment, Mark represented all of us. Mark was collectively standing there participating in this seventh generation evolution of how we understand and relate to one another in terms of our personal relationships and our relationship with Spirit. So the first of the seven strands, sub-strands, I would like to suggest to you is courtesy. Courtesy. Simple things that we can do. Hold the door open for people. Take your shopping cart back inside. Somebody's got to do it. You took it. Why should you not put it back, right? All these little simple ways that we can learn to demonstrate and practice humility in action. Number two, I would suggest would be compassion. Mark demonstrated a perfect example of humility in action when he felt a certain compassion for those nurses who had attended to our relative for such a long time, and who knows, maybe even extended his life. And that came from a place of compassion. Compassion is more than just about, feeling something. Compassion is about doing something, which leads us then to the third strand of humility, and that is empathy, where we are moved inside in a sacred manner that motivates us to do good, to do right, to look beyond ourselves and our own needs, and ask ourselves how we can show these seven sacred teachings that we believe in, we stand on, and upon which this church is founded. Empathy. Empathy is substantially different than sympathy. We may see something that breaks our heart, but until we get down on our knees and pick up a fallen relative, then it's just thought. And we go home and we say, "I really should have stopped," or "I really should have done this, that, or the other." to show empathy. But empathy is when we actually get in the mess. And sometimes life can get messy. Not just our lives, but lives of people that we care about. And out of that, when we begin to get into the mud with our relatives and our brothers and sisters, and squirm around and all that stuff and allow us to strip away the ego and say, brother, sister, I'm in the mud with you. We'll figure it out. That's empathy. The next strand I would like to suggest is forgiveness. For what good is all of our humility if when it's put into action, when we push the do button, if it's not done with a sense of the ability to forgive, then as the Apostle Paul said, we're just like a sounding brass and a clanging cymbal. We don't have to look and think far beyond where we are in the moment, to at least be considerate of where forgiveness is a just response. It's a good response. But when we go along in our lives holding grudges, we just get older and heavier the longer we carry them. I know I've told you the story of how two families of the same family in my second church in Conyers, Georgia, had been feuding together amongst themselves for years. You know, Brother Joe led one side of the fraction of the family, and Miss Louise led the other one, and they were brothers and sisters. We had two rows of pews. Joe Stanton and his family sat on one, and Miss Louise and her partners in crime sat on the other side. And I asked them both one day, I said, what are y'all so angry about? What are y'all fighting about? And we all know the answer to that question. Neither one of them had a clue. You know, it's just how we've always been. Well, if that's the case, then you can stop it, you know. And you begin by forgiveness. Whatever you presume or even know factually that you have been wronged, or maybe you have wronged someone, if we cannot engage forgiveness in that process, I don't think we're going to get very far along the road. And the other one is kindness. Kindness. The monks taught us a great lesson about kindness and compassion and courtesy and forgiveness and empathy. Kindness. I see so many videos on social media and on the news where people are just fighting each other for nothing. I mean, fist fighting in the middle of the streets. And it's getting worse every day to the point where you don't even need to read the news anymore. If you knew what happened yesterday, it happened again today, right? Kindness. And it doesn't take very much of us. It doesn't take much energy, and it doesn't take anything more than a desire, an intention to be kind to one another. And then from there, we would move to generosity. Because when we are humble, when we come in a humble manner, just as the offering of a plant of a flower, in that generous offering that Mark brought to those dear nurses, with a thanks and gratitude for the care that they had given to our relative. That's spot on humility. When we can look beyond ourselves and the balance in our own checkbook and see ourselves as loving and generous and kind. Doesn't take much effort to do that. I'll tell you a story that happened to me just Friday afternoon. I had stopped by the supermarket on Friday afternoon to pick up some pastries for the men's fellowship yesterday. And we had a marvelous time. John was there, and uh, I was there, and Rick was there. And we sat together and talked for 4 hours. It's amazing. A bunch of men would sit together for 4 hours. And you normally would think, well, I got to go now. But it was a beautiful morning. But I stopped by the supermarket to get some pastries for yesterday morning. And I had bought some other things for the weekend, a couple of which was packets of cheese, you know, cheddar cheese, Swiss cheese, and whatnot. I am particularly fond of a company called Tillamook, which makes dairy products. They make cheese, they make butter. I did not know until yesterday, or at least Friday, that they also made ice cream. Yeah? Well, it was no surprise to me that when I looked down on the belt, there was a small container of Tillamook vanilla ice cream. And quite understandably why, the cashier looked at that, looked at me, and she said, "Is this yours too?" I said, "No, it belongs to the lady behind me." And I looked back and I said, "Have you ever tried this before?" And she said, "No." She said, "I just have been craving ice cream." And I won't say she was a homeless person, but she kind of gave off that, persona, if you will. And I know that's very judgmental. I'm just trying to help you understand the context. Although I don't believe she was homeless. So we were talking about a container of Tillamook vanilla ice cream. And I said, "Have you ever tried this before?" And she said, "No, I was just craving some ice cream, and I came in to see what I could afford." And they had Tillamook on sale, buy one, get one free. Now, we all know, I think, how that works, although I did have to explain that to someone last night. If an item costs $9, you can buy two of them for $9. But you can also buy one for $4.50, right? And so she'd figured all this out because Tillamook ice cream was on sale Friday afternoon at the Kroger on the Epsbridge Parkway. Buy one, get one free. And she said, "No, I've never tried it before. Have you?" And I said, "No, I like their other products, but I've never tried the ice cream." And she said, "Well, I was just, I think she said jonesing for some vanilla ice cream, and that was the only thing I could afford." And I'm standing there holding the change that the cashier just gave to me, and we're having this conversation. So I asked the cashier about the ice cream for the lady. She ran it through the register. I said, "How much is that?" And she said, $4.51. And wouldn't you know, that's exactly the amount of change that the lady had just given me a few seconds before for my purchase. The exact same amount that she was going to pay because she couldn't afford anything else. $4 and I think it was 51 cents, but 4.50 is close enough. And so I gave the cashier the money, and the lady behind me doesn't have a clue what's going on. I'm sure you've seen these kind of videos on Facebook or social media where people are just doing and filming random acts of kindness. I never even thought about it. It was just Spirit said, "Buy the lady her ice cream." And Mark, she responded kind of like you do sometimes. She got really emotional and couldn't believe that somebody, a perfect stranger, was buying her the only thing she could afford. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You know, and the normal attitude I would take because the way I've been taught, you know, from the beginning, you know, don't think too much of yourself and all of these things that, you know, I learned as a small child that still haunt me today because, you know, to that woman, that ice cream was a big deal. Take me out of the equation, take the money out of the equation. Simple $4.50. That's not the point. But how we combined all of these strands of the teaching about humility and bring it down to doing. Humility in action. I'm not encouraging you to stand in the grocery line and find people that you can buy groceries for, but why not? You know, if you can afford it, and if you can do it in a way that doesn't come from ego, but it comes from a place of pure spirit, which is then the seventh strand, although I'm getting ahead of myself, the seventh strand then of humility is you see how it brings us all, and an example of a moment of buying a stranger a container of ice cream because that's all she could afford, right? That's humility in action, which brings us then to that place a little bit closer to unity, of oneness, of wholeness, restoration. All of the things that we as seventh generation relatives are taught, how we live, how we behave, how we are in relations, in relationships. And that all then wraps that strand up in a very loving way. Because I can assure you the hugs that I got from the lady and the line at the grocery store. She probably walked away, as did I, with an entirely different understanding of what love is all about. Because then, you see, we pressed the do button. We can learn all this stuff. We can get a PhD in all of it and walk away and not make any difference in how we live or other people live. But it's only once we learn the things that we need to learn, we don't even have to wait to learn it all, but we push the do button. Even if it's something simple like buying someone a container of ice cream. And I never tried it, but you just confirmed that it must be good. So you need to stop by Kroger on your way home. And if you need some money, I'll be happy to buy you. I'll have to try that. I can't eat ice cream. I can't. And I can't eat cookies or donuts or cake. This is why I had to stop Friday afternoon to buy some because Thursday afternoon I had stopped already and bought 2 dozen donuts. And by the time Saturday morning came around, the box was empty. I don't understand what happened. You know, that's kind of my mindset. If there's something still in the box in the morning, there's something wrong with this picture here. I'm the poster boy for Lay's potato chips because they're right. I can't eat just one. One bag, maybe. But do you begin to see how all this fits together? And it's no accident that it is arranged in the manner as it is arranged. Now, when I was putting the theology, if you will, of this church together post my vision, I was aware of and familiar with the seven sacred teachings. But everywhere I looked and everywhere I researched, they were all included, but just listed in different order. And it was when I began to look at the progression of the medicine wheel, where we begin and where we start over again, where it all begins and where it all begins again, that I see how the arrangement of the seven sacred teachings, coordinate with the seven sacred directions, it just makes more sense to me to express it this way that we can begin to evaluate and understand and analyze our lives, what's taking place, what's going on, where are the rough edges. We can always put it under the template and the microscope of the medicine wheel and the seven sacred teachings. We may make a prayer, Creator, I feel a little bit out of balance here. What do I need to do? What do I need to understand? What do I need to change? What do I need to adjust? And so not only does it give us a roadmap of life, but it also gives us a very sacred and very intimate and personalized evaluation, which enables us to use that as a tool to make us stronger, to make us wiser, to make us strengthen our knowledge and our wisdom, which eventually will bring us to that point where indeed, red man, white man, black man, yellow man, we don't have any regard for color. We are just there as one. One in the human family. And when we are there, oh my goodness, the love that flows out of that is so potent and so powerful. Even if it's something simple as, I bet you if we had some spoons, she probably would have shared some of that ice cream with me on Friday afternoon. But that's how it works. And it's all woven together in a very intentional and sacred manner. So that's all that I have to say for today. And I hope that that brings our understanding and our wisdom about the first of the seven sacred teachings, humility, with and in a little bit more clarity.
Recap the seven strands.
The seven strands?
Sub-strands.
Okay. It's courtesy,
Yep.
compassion, empathy, forgiveness, kindness, generosity, and love. Any other comments, observations, or thoughts? Say that again.
Thank you for the do.
I'm sorry, for the what?
Thank you for the do.
Oh, okay. You know, it's a strange thing. I got to get my hearing aids worked on because I can hear you speaking, but I just can't understand the words. And the way I listen is I try to listen for words that I can recognize and then connect the whole sentence together. And sometimes I just can't make that work. But and I appreciate your patience for that. That's just one of the challenges that I have. But that's the most important thing, Tom, right there, is the do button. You know, it's like these massive billion-dollar rockets that they put together and build to do all kind of unimaginable things, like taking a man or a woman to the moon, right? And how long we have to plan for that. That thing can sit on the launch pad forever. But until somebody presses the do button, the launch button, nothing happens. But think about it in that analogy of the rocket. When that button is pushed, it's a pretty powerful moment. Things get shifted and things get changed around. Have any of you ever had the opportunity to see a rocket launch? Huh?
Live or just
Say it again.
live?
Oh, yeah, live and in person. Many years ago, I had gone to Key West with a buddy of mine, and we coordinated the trip to stop back by the Cape. They were going to launch one of the space shuttles. And I had the opportunity to be there, and that was, I can't describe to you what a powerful, I mean, you feel the earth moving, you know, and it's just, you get caught up and everything is just shaking, and the vibration and the energy of it all is just unbelievable. And so it is with our own personal relationships. When we press the launch button, when we press the do button, that's one of the keys to magic and miracles, and manifesting that.